Member of the GOP that we have had a chance to talk to about this. No word from Ryan, no word from McConnell. When you have a man of Flynn's stature resign, and in his own letter saying that he misled, maybe even lied to other members of the White House, why is everybody so quiet?
Well, it's Valentine's Day, and I guess they're having breakfast with their wives. Really, all I can say is I'm sorry to see General Flynn go. I don't know the details of what transpired. I do know General Flynn. I know that he's very loyal to President Trump. I do know he's a great American. He has stepped down, obviously, something he felt was in the best interest of this country. I certainly respect that, but I know I live in the world. We move on from here. I'm not going to be one, nor would I hope others would dwell on the situation or pile on, to use another term. I think it's just time to move on, find the replacement. I certainly know General Kellogg. He would be a great person to replace him, the others as well. So
right.
I'm in a let's move on. We've got a lot of issues to deal with, as was mentioned, North Korea, and continuing discussions with Russia. It's a busy, busy White House, so General Flynn did what he thought was in the best interests of the country. I certainly respect that, and I think it's just time to move on.
Congressman, there is zero chance that we're going to move on until the answers to the questions that present itself at least get notice from the White House. They wouldn't even take questions this morning. The White House hasn't taken questions from an open organization in days. As you know, that was no mistake. Do you believe that General Flynn misled or lied to the White House? Kellyanne Conway, at another show this morning, is saying exactly that.
Well, I don't know the details of what was said. I was not part of the private conversation between he and Vice President Pence, obviously. Again, General Flynn did what he thought was in the best interests of the country. If his description of the events were, he was less than forthright, then so be it. He's decided to move on. I'm certainly not one to prejudge or judge what he said.
But you think this was all about Mike Flynn? You think it begins and ends with him?
Oh, I absolutely believe it begins and ends with General Flynn.
And yet, we know for a fact that the DOJ and Intel chiefs let the White House counsel know that Mike Flynn discussed sanctions with his Russian counterpart weeks ago. Knew it cannot begin and end with Mike Flynn because we know the White House counsel was told. That means the White House knew and did nothing for weeks. How do you explain that?
Well, I cannot explain what exactly happened, but there's nothing wrong with the incoming National Security Advisor having conversations prior to actually taking office. It's certainly not allowed to negotiate or pretend that you're negotiating on behalf of the country until you're in office. And again, that's a nuance that I don't know the details of, but actually having a discussion with the Russian ambassador, there's nothing illegal about that.
But there is nothing nuanced about this. There's everything that is potentially illegal because of the Logan Act. It never gets prosecuted, but the law is pretty clear. And this type of material negotiation of national security interest to the United States, if anything was going to trigger the law, this would. So it certainly wasn't harmless. But more importantly, the question is, Mike Flynn couldn't have been doing this all by himself because we know that the White House was informed of what he was doing. Now, he says he misled the White House. It has been suggested that he lied to the vice president. But do you really believe, Congressman, that nobody knew anything about what Mike Flynn was doing, even in the face of the fact that they were told weeks ago? That should be a rhetorical question. It shouldn't even be possible as to whether or not nobody knew what Flynn was doing. Don't you agree?
Well, I don't believe anyone knew what General Flynn was doing or directed him to do something relative to the discussion with the Russian ambassador. I believe that was General Flynn's decision to have the conversation he had. As to who knew what, if somebody was, intercepting that phone call and listening in, that's something that's certainly been suggested. But the details of it, I have no knowledge of.
But what more do we need to know then? December 29th, they intercept the communication. They then tell, who's they? The Department of Justice, Sally Yates, the woman who got removed for supposedly being a grandstander. She says she was doing her job then, and she was doing her job now. This information. Intel chiefs did it as well. They knew that he discussed sanctions with his Russian counterpart at the same time that the Russian president mysteriously decided not to act the way it does every time in exchange with the United States. The United States kicked out some spies, closed down a couple of these safe houses that Russia had. Usually they respond, but not this time. You have no questions about who knew. You have no curiosity about this, even though it deals with the heart of national security.
Well, to be honest, I just live in a world where I always move forward. In a busy world, you don't dwell on the past. At this point in time, General Flynn has decided to resign.
Come on, Congressman. It's Valentine's Day, and for the love of truth, you cannot say that you just want to move on. If this were the Obama White House, if we were talking about President Hillary Clinton, and you found out that her counsel knew weeks ago, which means that's her mouthpiece, that's her right hand, knew weeks ago that this man was playing with the Russians about sanctions, and you just want to move on? How is anybody supposed to hear that and say, yeah, Collins is being a fair broker on this?
Well, because that is actually the world I live in. I call it a guess what, now what world. Guess what? He's resigned. Now what? We've got a lot of issues to deal with. That's the way I live my life. I don't dwell on the past. General Flynn has resigned. You don't want to know
whether our president knew that Mike Flynn had been talking to the Russians about sanctions? You don't want to know?
Well, I think we all know that General Flynn had a discussion with the Russian ambassador. That's clear. I don't think anyone's ever tried to say otherwise. The depth or
wait a
the
minute.
details.
Flynn tried to say otherwise. The White House tried to cover it in a different way. What do you mean nobody said otherwise? Everybody said otherwise.
I said he had a discussion with the Russian ambassador. That's not.
You said about sanctions. That's the key part.
The detail here is sanctions. If they talked about it, that's one thing. If they negotiated about it, as you pointed out, that would be breaching the Logan Law. But again, those are details and nuances. I have zero information on, Chris. I do not know the details of that. I'm not going to second guess who said what or when. All I know today, it's a sad day. General Flynn has resigned. It's in his determination that's best for the country. I respect that. He's a gentleman. He's a great American. Right. And I'm not going to pile on.
Yeah, but it's not about piling on, Congressman. Don't mistake my intention. And to be honest, I don't think you are. These are real questions, Congressman. This doesn't go away because Flynn resigned. We have to know who is in the business of appeasing Russia within our White House. Don't you understand the vital importance of that question?
Well, it's a new day. As of 22 days ago, President Trump is now in charge. President Trump can have any discussions he wants to have relative to sanctions or anything else, negotiating with Russia or any other country. So what was said prior to January 20th is moot. At this point, it is in President Trump's hands what discussions he has on sanctions or any other matter. So who said what prior to January 20th is no longer really of any concern of mine, since President Trump can have any discussions he wants to have related to these very issues.
But what about the truth? What about our trust in that what the White House says is true is true? We saw that they didn't want to take any critical questions about Mike Flynn. We saw that the President of the United States feigned ignorance about the controversy surrounding Mike Flynn when asked. He said, maybe the most media-savvy man I've ever met in my life, said, I have no idea about these reports about Mike Flynn. I'll have to ask someone. It's the first thing I've ever heard President Trump ever say that he didn't know about that was happening in the media. And now we know the White House counsel knew, and for weeks the White House did nothing. And now we know that the vice president came out and took the back of Mike Flynn. Now he says he was lied to. We don't know anything about who was working with Flynn, how this was coordinated, why there seems to be this desire to shelter Russia from responsibility for its nefarious actions. We had the president say he's not sure about whether or not Russia has involvement with separatists in Ukraine. These are very daunting situations that deserve answers, no?